All right, so now we are going to talk about a very common houseplant pest. And again, this is one I get frequently in the winter when it's drier in the house for some reason. So John is going to talk to us about identifying and managing spider mites on your house plants.
Yeah, so this was a really fascinating topic for me because in our household we kind of divide and conquer, and my wife is in charge of the house plants. So I don't do too much with the house plants, and so this was very interesting for me to learn more about it because I do see spider mites outside sometimes, but I had never paid attention inside. But then when I asked, I found out yeah, they do occur sometimes. So at our house and is common in lots of other places. So if you go to the next slide. So you can see there's a picture there from the University of Maryland spider mites. The ones pictured there, that's the two-spotted spider mite, which according to my research is the most common one we have. But they're tiny pests. They're related to spiders, hence the name. They only feed on plants. One of the things that's very challenging about them is that they have a very broad host range. So like when we talk about butterflies, sometimes we talk about, oh, it only lay eggs on these two varieties of milkweed or whatnot. These things can reproduce on just about every house plant, a very broad range of hosts. And they can also be a problem year round. They reproduce very quickly, so you get many generations in a single year. And some species, including the two-spotted one, produce webbing, such as you can see in the photo there, but they don't all produce webbing. So don't just use the webbing as the only sign that you have an infestation. So next slide. So what they do is they suck the chlorophyll out of the leaves, resulting in like little white spots. It's called stippling. I should have included a better picture of stippling, but basically it's kind of like some of the color just drain, like blotches of color draining out of the green leaves. And they're almost as like white spots on them. The reason I included this picture is I think we sometimes don't think about succulents having some of the exact same pests as regular plants, but in fact, spider mites can go after succulents as well. The heavy feeding on them, it causes it to yellow, then the leaves will go brown and eventually they'll die. The way that people test for mites is they'll take either the leaves or the plant itself, they'll shake it over a piece of paper. Obviously you want to do this a little bit carefully, but if you see the webbing, then you have the mites. But if you're not quite sure, but you see either the stippling or the loss of color in the leaves, you can shake those leaves over a piece of paper and then look at it. And if you see a lot of little tiny insects, a very, very good chance they're spider mites. As I mentioned, they're very, very small. Lots of literature I looked at keeps describing them as the size of a period. If you're like me and your eyes have gotten much worse over the last 40 years, you're not going to be able to look at that period and decide that it's got 8 legs versus 6. But if you get anything, it is quite likely a spider mite. Next slide. And so how could people control spider mites? Well, the one simple way to do it is, if you're able to do it, is to periodically, any house plant that you have that you suspect you might have it, you can bring it outside and just kind of spray it off with water, especially the lower leaf surfaces. And that's a kind of a mechanical way of doing it. It doesn't involve any pesticides or anything else. And that will, at a minimum, it'll significantly reduce the population and keep them at bay, and it could get rid of all of them. Of course, if you only have to miss one, and then the problem will come back 2 months from now. If you do need control, though, one thing you can use is a miticide or an insecticidal soap, unless you're growing jade, I've just learned, so don't use it on jade. But when you're going to look at those things, this is the very key thing. You have to look and see that it is labeled for use on spider mites. Because it's a spider, it has a different physiology than an insect. And I'm not a chemist or whatever, but a lot of times the insecticides are really geared towards insects, and many of them don't work at all on spiders, including spider mites. So you have to make sure you read the label. And I have the picture I've got there is, and the links at the bottom. There's a 2-page flyer on spider mites and spider mite control at the Virginia Cooperative Extension. As I mentioned, you have to, if you're going to use an insecticide at all, specifically not for spider mites, you can also use things for the, like the insecticidal soaps and stuff like that. Neem oil works fine. I think, and this is based more on anecdotal evidence online, but you know, some people say that, you know, their spider mites happen to be resistant to neem oil, so they do something different. You might have to try a couple of different, depending on how resistant your spider mites are, you might have to try a couple of different solutions. Next slide. Or is that it? Oh, that's it. Any questions?
Any questions on spider mites? I have one. I think spider mites are one of the typical pests that, unless you are careful about cleaning off your plants, if you put plants outdoors in the summertime, you can bring them indoors and infect the rest of your indoor plants.
Yes, and in fact, they lay their eggs often in the soil.
Yes.
And so this is one of those instances where if you're bringing a container plant outside, you might get spider mites that then lay their eggs in the potting soil, and then you bring that inside and you spread to the rest of your indoor plant population. So yeah, that's something you have to be very careful of.
So what do you recommend for when, you know, if we do have our plants out on the deck for the summertime and we bring them in, how do we treat the soil for those eggs? Do you know?
I didn't see anything about treating the soil specifically. I think if you shower them with things like a neem oil or whatever, that will kill it. One of my philosophies is that it's kind of, I have the same philosophy with weeds as well, is you never fully eliminate every pest. You just want to make sure you keep it under control. So I would definitely not want to discourage somebody from bringing their plants outside to get some real natural sun just because they're afraid they might bring a spider mite inside. But if you can keep them under control and just kind of keep an eye every time you're watering it, just to take a look, particularly on the underside of the leaves, to see if you have any pest, spider mites or otherwise. And then when you do have them, you know, treat them, you'll be in very good shape. In general, when they get out of control, it's because someone's not been paying any attention, and you've got multiple generations that have built up by the time they notice the giant web.
Yeah, so they're laying eggs in the soil, and they're just hatching. It's sort of you got several different stages of life cycle going on all the time. Yeah.
Right. And I see the question that just came up, and the answer is I'm not sure. That it could work. You just have to take a look to see if I never know how to say that.
Diatomaceous earth.
Diatomaceous earth. You'd have to, I would just read the label. That wasn't one, it didn't come up in my research, but I didn't look at every possible solution to it. The miticide was the most common one that they recommended because it's specifically tailored for spiders and mites.
Yeah, I was really surprised to see your picture on the cactus.
Yeah, that's why I included it.
That's surprising. Yeah, because you tend to think of cactus being bulletproof.
Yeah, the pictures I got, it was labeled on the pictures themselves, but all the pictures, the 2 pictures I use of plants are both from the University of Maryland Cooperative Extension. They had a lot of good information, and they focused one of their big points was that it isn't just your most common house plants. It also is on succulents, and it can be on a wide variety of things, including plants you wouldn't normally associate.